vibrating friends are switched off. It takes some courage to switch them off for a little bit, but we can manage. It takes even more courage to play the guitar in front of people when you have never done this before, which is something we're about to see, as well as hear some great stories about reclaiming forgotten voices. So please, let's give a warm welcome all the way from Australia, Alisa.
Choosing to be here. I'm very, very grateful. I have got a handy water and my puffer nearby because I have had a bit of trouble with asthma. So please just pretend it doesn't happen if I need to do that. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You have all been waiting for this moment to arrive. You have all been waiting for this moment to arrive. You have all been waiting for this moment to arise. When I was a little girl, I loved books more than anything in the entire world. At night, after my mum had turned the light out, I'd pull the blankets up over me, get the lamp and shine it right into the little hole I'd made for myself, and read, just using the little bit of light I had. My favourite books were collections of folk and fairy tales. And in fairy tales, I learned from Snow White and Rose Red about kindness, even in the face of an ungrateful little dwarf. I learned that honesty is the best policy, stealing is wrong, and even the worst monsters in the world can be defeated with courage, intelligence, and persistence. Fairy tales and books became my safe place. My favourite collection was actually a 2-book Reader's Digest. Does anyone remember those? 2-book Reader's Digest that was the same green as our signs. And inside, it smelled like home. And the panels of illustrations just made me dive into the stories deeper. For reasons I do not understand, books became my safe place. Fairy tales became my safe place. In my family, in my school, in my community, I shut down my voice, I shut down my heart, and I shut down my sexual creative centre. It could have been when my well-meaning grandfather said to me, "You got a boyfriend yet?" I was 5. It could have been when I overheard some of the girls in my netball team, like basketball, but not like basketball, my netball team being not very nice about me because I got to play in the centre position every time and they didn't. Their jealousy cut me in the heart. Or it could have been when my very, very vulnerable 14-year-old self went to a family barbecue where one of my dad's friends looked me up and down and said, "You're so pretty, you should be a model." I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. And I learned very well how to hide myself. I developed an unhealthy attachment to food at this time. I didn't wear anything nice or beautiful. I didn't take care of my hair or my appearance. And I mastered the art of invisibility. I could walk between worlds, nobody seeing me in a crowded room. At some point, the inner child in me separated. My little girl was no longer part of this body, and disassociation became the way that I coped with things. Even last week, I had a moment of disassociation. And life happened. Over time, I forgot about the magic of the fairy tales and the safety contained within their stories. And on August 15, 2020, I'd gone back to the town I grew up in, where all these traumas happened. Went to the school, and those girls were very mean to me. And I took a job as a teacher at the school. And the job came with a house. And on August 15, I was in a curled up fetal position on the floor, on my side, deciding whether to live or die, because this separation could no longer continue. I looked up and I saw a collection of books, my most treasured possessions, collections of folk and fairy tales. I'd carted them around the world, all over the place. They go with me everywhere. Except here, I wore a whole heap here. They go with me everywhere. And something awakened in me. I sat up. I took down a book and started reading. Japanese myth. In the time before time, when nothing was named, and chaos reigned, the earth and sky split, and the divine was born. From the divine came 8 pairs of beings that were responsible for creating the earth. One pair, Izanami and Izanagi, were to create the land. The earth at this time was a massive soup of swampy water, and from their place in the clouds, Izanami and Izanagi reached down with their jeweled spear, and stirred. They brought up hills, mountains, islands, countries, continents. And they worked very, very well together until one day they had a fight. Izanagi was furious and he stormed off. He dropped his sword on the ground, and from his sword came the spirit of the land. He stripped off his shirt, and another spirit, and another. With every item of clothing, spirits grew from the ground. Izanagi stepped into the water, and from his left eye took the sun goddess Amaterasu. From the right, the moon god, and from his nose, the storm god Susanoo. Amaterasu took care of the day sky, the moon god the night, and Susanoo the space between earth and sky. Amaterasu was so beautiful that when she walked, flowers blossomed at her feet. She gave from her heart, as is the way with the feminine. And her favourite thing to do was to sit at her sacred spinning loom and create clothing of the finest quality, that when the wearer wore it, they would shine. Amaterasu also looked after fields and fields of rice paddies, a great forest full of life. And she had a herd of horses that went from here to the horizon. Izanagi decided that it was time for him to pass on the right to rule, and as Amaterasu was first born, he handed her his necklace, and Amaterasu became ruler of all dominions. But Susanoo was not happy. He cried and had tantrums and caused floods and chaos to come up in the world, so much that Izanagi had to banish him. But before he left, Susanoo flattened Amaterasu's rice fields. He burned her forest to the ground, and he slaughtered every single horse in her herd, except one, her favourite. That he brought before her, decapitated it, took out its heart, skinned it, and then dropped it on her sacred spinning wheel. Amaterasu was devastated. She got up. She ran across the plains and up the hill until she found a cave, and she rolled a great boulder in front of the cave and tucked herself inside. Outside, the world darkened, and the spirits decided that they needed to go get her back. And one by one, they went up the hill, and they begged and pleaded for Amaterasu to come out. They offered her things, but she still stayed silent and tucked inside herself for a year. I'm 50 this year, which is a pretty big deal. And I often think about that little girl and the journeys we've been on together. And I've been to a lot of counsellors and psychologists inviting her to come back in here. She's beautiful. Sometimes, in my mind, I have these thoughts, particularly in social situations. Thoughts about expectations of other people, jealousy, and of the desires of men. I have thoughts like, am I too fat? Am I too ugly? Am I too pretty? Am I too angry? Am I too sad? Am I too much desire? Do I have too much desire in me? Am I too passionate? Am I too creative? Am I too much? So in the spirit, I'm inviting this little girl back in here. I'd like to offer a poem that I wrote. A match to all the hiding, the fear of being seen. The fear of judgment and criticism, the fear of my own being. A match to all the longing to be strong enough to stand in front of wild horses and taking firm command. Light up the deep dissatisfaction of pretending not to care about what others think of me, especially when I'm not there. Burn down the house of exile, of hiding in my home. Burn down permission needed to stand and walk alone. Spark up the new horizons of standing in my skin, of not giving a flying fuck about ever fitting in. Inviting all my sisters I've held at arm's length, inviting them to see me in my full length and breadth. Inviting their own voices to say just what they will, for I'm no longer hiding like a mole under a hill, standing in the limelight to be judged, seen and heard, Forget about what others think about my ideas and words. Light up the night with sadness, let the sparks dissolve in air, inviting in the laughter that's been hidden with due care. Be unafraid to step into this body and this skin, to walk and talk with confidence without worrying if I'm thin. Enough of all the delays of hiding from the world. I'm enough, just as I am. In myself, I am held. So the little girl and I have worked very hard to bring ourselves together. But I wonder if there's another layer under this silencing that I feel, which has been running through my family line. If I think about my maternal grandmother, she was born in the 1920s. She was the youngest of 7 children and the only girl. I cannot imagine for a second that my grandmother had a voice in her family. And I wonder if it doesn't go further back. About 500 years ago, in Europe, there was a fairly even society. Women and men were able to have a voice. Things were very open and people were available and people were respected. Women were respected a lot more than they were afterwards. But in about 1500, the church decided that sex was for the purpose of procreation and between a man and a woman. So if you were a woman about this time who loved sex and got it often, you were now marginalised. Not only did that shut down your sexual creative centre, but it also shut down your voice. To silence a woman means to silence her sexuality, her creative force, and all that she is. But women are smart, aren't we? We found ways around this. In letters, embroidery, and fairy tales. In letters, women wrote to each other gossip and intrigue. They wrote rendezvous meetings in code with their lovers. They wrote messages to their husbands, all in code. In embroidery, they stitched their frustration and anxieties. And in fairy tales, we'll come back to those. Even though women had lost their physical voice, they still had a way of expressing themselves. They still had a voice. And in the spirit of my love for fairy tales, here is one of my favourites. Once upon a time, in a kingdom somewhere, sometime, there was a king who was so single-focused on the hunt that he lost his retinue and became lost in the forest. The trees crowded around him and it was getting near dark. The king looked about to try and find an exit but could not find anything. He came across an old woman who said, "I know the way out. You will die if you stay here. You must marry my daughter." The king, not seeing any other choice, agreed to this arrangement and followed the old woman to her cottage, where he found a beautiful young woman who looked like she'd been waiting for him. Something about her made the king's skin crawl. But he had agreed. So he put the young woman on the horse in front of him and with the old woman's directions headed back to his castle. Now the king had 7 children from a previous marriage, 6 boys and a girl, like my grandmother. And he was a bit concerned about his new queen and his children. So as soon as he arrived, he whispered to one of his attendants to take the children away somewhere safe, which he did. The king and the young woman were married, and she became the new queen. The king went to seek the wisdom of a wise woman, who gave him a ball of yarn that led the way to the place where the children were hidden. And all he had to do was unravel the yarn, and it would take him straight to his beloveds. The king went often to see his children, and every time he arrived, the children ran out to meet him. The queen, meanwhile, was very suspicious of his regular absences. She sought to bribe the servants to find out where the king was going and who he was with. Eventually, she found out about the children and the ball of yarn, and set out to where the children were hidden. As she came up the driveway, the 6 boys ran out to meet her, thinking it was their father. But the new queen was prepared. She had stitched garments with an enchantment. She threw the 6 shirts over the 6 boys, and they turned at once into swans. The queen washed her hands of the problem and returned home. When next the king came to see his children, Eliza came to meet him with a handful of feathers from her brothers. She told the king what had happened, but he couldn't believe that his queen would do such a thing, even though he had felt that evil in her in the beginning. He invited Eliza to go with him to the castle to keep her safe, but Eliza was having none of it. She ran through the forest, arms and legs cut by branches, running through, until she was so exhausted she found a cottage with 6 little beds. She crawled in underneath one of the beds and fell asleep. Close to sunset, she looked out the door and heard the fluttering of wings. She saw her brothers descending into the doorway, stepping into their human form. She came out from underneath the bed and went to embrace her brothers, who told her they could only stay human form for 15 minutes every day. Eliza asked how she could break this curse and what she could do. Her brother said, "Oh, it's far too hard. You must remain silent for 6 years. And in that time, you must stitch us from nettle shirts. And should a sound come out of your mouth in that time, a laugh, a cry, a yell, a scream, then all of your work will be undone." Eliza stopped speaking immediately, embraced each of her brothers one more time before they turned back into swans, and set out to pick up the nettle. Every day she picked up the nettle, turned it into what she needed it to be. At the end of the day, washed her hands and picked out every one of the splinters before going to sit. Eliza didn't think it was safe to stay in the cottage, and so she set herself up deep in the forest, in the branches of a tree. And there she worked day and night, harvesting, preparing, taking the splinters out of her hands, and eventually making the fabric that she needed to make the shirts. After a year, she had finished 1 shirt and had not made a sound. a king or a young man, a young prince was coming through and saw her up in the tree and was curious about why the girl was sitting up in the tree sewing. And he called to her in all the languages he knew, but she didn't respond. She just continued her work. She threw down her necklace, hoping that they would go away. She threw down her garter. She threw down her dress. And still, the young prince and his entourage would not leave. In the end, the huntsman came up and brought her down, Eliza holding her precious items close to her chest. He took her back to the castle, and Eliza was bathed and cleaned, and came down and had dinner with the young prince. And over time, they fell in love. But his mother was not happy with the arrangement, and especially after they married. The whole time, Eliza would spend nearly every day either gathering or preparing or taking splinters out or weaving or stitching. Whatever she needed to get those shirts done, she did in complete silence. After some time, the king and Eliza had a beautiful baby boy. She didn't make a sound. She put him to bed, sang him good night, and then sat down to her work again. Sometime during the night, the prince's mother slaughtered a goat, came up to sleeping Eliza and wiped blood across her mouth, and stole the baby away to a convent. In the morning, the prince's mother accused Eliza of eating her baby. Eliza could not defend herself, and the king couldn't believe that his beautiful wife would do such a thing. Another year passed. Another beautiful baby. Again, the prince's mother slaughtered a goat, put the blood across her face, stole the baby away. In the morning, she accused Eliza of eating her baby again. And the king was, it cannot be. She is far too good. She is far too wonderful a mother to do such a thing. But after the third time, the king had to take action. Eliza was sent to trial, found guilty of eating her babies, and sentenced to burn. At this point, she had finished 5 shirts, and she laid across her arm as they led her to the fire. The 6th shirt was missing the left sleeve, and it was 6 years that it was up. And as she walked towards it, she looked up into the sky and saw 6 swans descending in front of her. She threw the 6 shirts over her brothers, and they returned to their human form. Eliza embraced her brothers. The youngest still had a swan's wing from the missing sleeve. And then she turned to her husband and spoke her first words to him. "Husband, I am innocent." And she told him of the curse and the things that she had to do to make things right. "I would never kill my babies." It was found that the babies were in the convent, and they were returned and reunited with the young prince and Eliza. And the prince, Eliza, the children and brothers lived happily ever after. And I guess you're wondering, what happened to the young man's mother? Some say that she got a terrible punishment. Others say that she was burnt at the stake instead of Eliza. Burnt at the stake. Burnt at the stake. Can you imagine what it might be like to live in a time when you could be put to death by fire for keeping a controlled silence? Or for speaking your truth? Despite common misconception, not all women were burnt at the stake. Many were, this is true. But the statistics are actually a lot lower than we think. But witch hunts continue for women in the world today. It's in parts of Africa and other parts of the world. And women have been chased and accused of witchery for thousands of years. I wonder if a part of us stops ourselves from being joyful, or passionate, or angry, or sexy, or happy because we fear persecution, because somewhere deep in our bones we fear the burning. Return to my favourite topic in the entire world, fairy tales. So not only through letters and embroidery, but through fairy tales, women were able to find ways of communicating. In the 17th century in France, there were a group of women who wrote many of the famous fairy tales we know today. The term fairy tale itself was coined by Madame Donois in 1697. When we think of fairy tales, we think of the Grimms, we think Hans Christian Andersen, we might think of Charles Perrault. Where are the women? These women had huge contribution to fairy tales and literature in general. Their names are forgotten. For my thesis last year, I worked on a woman called Charlotte Rose de la Force. Say her name with me. Charlotte Rose de la Force. Charlotte Rose de la Force was one of the French women in this salon at this time. She wrote 8 fairy tales, one of which is an early version of Rapunzel, the form of Rapunzel that we use today with the Grimm's style. Charlotte Rose had a beautiful, witty, funny writing voice. She wrote historical fiction novels, and one of her greatest achievements was actually the formation of the historical fiction novel was part of her contribution to the world. Nobody knows Charlotte. I wonder if at the end of her 74-year life, after the King Louis XIV, had imprisoned her in a convent, which was quite common for women at that time, in a convent for being in possession of a pornographic novel, I wonder if she thought her work mattered, whether her contribution to the world, to literature, to fairy tale, to the communities that she was in, whether they mattered at all. Charlotte's voice matters. My voice matters. Your voice matters. And like the little girl, the start of this story, too afraid to speak, too afraid to sing, too afraid of being too much, too happy. There comes a time when the desire to be seen, to be heard, to be happy, to be joyful becomes greater than the desire for invisibility. If I want to see the world I wish to see, I need to be it. Amaterasu stayed locked inside her cave for a year. The spirits came up one by one and begged and pleaded for Amaterasu to come out. But she didn't. And down the bottom of the hill was the goddess of fun and laughter. And the goddess of fun and laughter watched the spirits going up, begging, pleading for Amaterasu to come out. She started laughing. She started laughing, and this laughing is contagious. Children soon started laughing. Izumi picked up the dead and dying flowers and wove them into crowns and placed them onto all the laughing children. And then the adults started laughing. And then everybody was laughing, and then there was some drumming. And then there was some dancing, and Izumi got up and she led everybody up the hill, dancing and singing. Hooting! Let's go some hooting! She left them up the hill, and when she got to the top, out in front of Amaterasu's cave, she saw a stone, big stone, and she stepped upon it, stripped off all of her clothes, and started dancing erotically, her heaving voluminous breasts like pendulums, her vulva open for the world to see, and the crowd went. Izumi stopped the crowd. Amaterasu, in her cave, heard the sudden silence after the chaos and became curious. And she pulled open the door just a little bit, and the light from Amaterasu's heart went out, and she could see reflected on the faces of all the people that she loved her light, and their clothes shined, showing their inner light as well. Amaterasu opened the door fully, stepped in to the light. Amaterasu never hid her light away again, because without her light, nobody else's light could shine. I'm going to treat you to a song. I don't know if it's a treat or not. This is by American singer India Arie. Like Roy said, this could be a shit show. I met a prophet, stark as the night. She could see into my soul. Said she'd been watching, had some advice. She said shadows make you whole. Life without pain is a wolf in sheep's clothes. 'Cause if you listen to the lessons that it holds, you'll find the gold. Child, it's time to break the shell. Life's gonna hurt, but it's meant to be felt. You cannot touch the sky from inside yourself. You cannot fly until you break the shell. I can remember when I time to peel back all the layers you put between who you're meant to be and who you are. So much disappointment to finally understand that there is no such thing as perfect. We're all simply doing the best that we can, and we have a choice to live or truly be alive. This is your life, child. It's time to break the shell. It's gonna hurt, but it's meant to be felt. You can touch the sky from inside yourself. You cannot fly until you break. Child, it's time to break the shell. It's gonna hurt, but it's meant to be felt. You cannot touch the sky from inside yourself. A bird cannot fly until it breaks the shell. I'll leave you with a part at the end of the song which goes, do with these words what you will. It's time for us to be for real. You'll be stuck on the ground until you finally break the shell.